As with both his accessory lifts and his movement primers, Lasha focuses on the extension of his legs, prioritising the use of his quads throughout the pull rather than his back in order to promote the feeling and look of how his coach, George Yasinidze, wants the lifts to be executed. As a result, every single snatch session that Lasha performs begins with no contact muscle snatches, a movement that reduces the extension in the hips to avoid making contact, forcing him to find the acceleration through the legs to generate the type of speed that allows 120 kilos, or 264 pounds, to float over his head with no real loss of speed, for a set of 3. And then it's time to snatch. The training hall was extremely full on this day, with the Koreans, Australians, Romanians, Americans and more packed onto the platforms, preparing for competition, and of course, keeping an eye on the best super heavyweight ever. And I don't say that lightly. Just before we get into that, I uploaded another light Lasha training session to the Weightlifting House Patreon page, complete with muscle snatches, power snatches, presses and more. The link is down below. So you can't really have the conversation of the greatest ever without bringing up names like Anatoly Pisarenko, a 3-time world champion from the USSR who totaled 465 kilos. Then again, that's 19 kilos behind Lasha, and with fewer world championships than Lasha already has in his career. Plus, unlike Lasha, he never won an Olympic Games. Pisarenko did clean and jerk 265 kilos, however, a weight that Lasha is still 1 kilo under, and he did it at a much lighter body weight. But even when body weight is taken into account, Pisarenko doesn't beat Lasha in the total by Sinclair. Well then, what of Alexander Kurlovich from the USSR and Belarus, the most decorated super heavyweight ever? Well, Lasha already has as many world championships to his name, more European championships, and after Tokyo, probably the same number of Olympic medals. Then there's Leonid Taranenko, the USSR and Belarusian lifter who holds the record for the heaviest clean and jerk of all time at 266 kilos, a weight still yet to be bested or even equalled in competition. By today's standards, the lift would almost certainly have received red lights. However, the consistency of refereeing back then was also very up and down, with Kurlovich more than once also lifting 266 kilos, but being called for a press out when seemingly none existed. And so along with Taranenko's pressy 266, in the same meet he hit his heaviest snatch ever at 210 kilos, giving him a 476 kilo total, a weight that Lasha has beaten 3 times. 8 kilos below Lasha's best. Also, with regards to Taranenko's best snatch of 210 kilos, Lasha lifted more than that 10 times, equaling it another 4 times, even opening with it. So what about the more modern super heavyweight champion, Iran's Hussein Rezazadeh? Well, Rezazadeh was amazing at both lifts, and you could put them together on the same day too. Where Kurlovich and Taranenko managed to put up a total of 470 kilos or more twice each, Hussein Rezazadeh managed it 3 times, all 3 times at 472.5 kilos. Lasha has already done it 5 times. Of course, there are individual metrics that we can use to rank a single super heavyweight over Lasha in that single niche domain. But when you add them all together, I don't think you can make a case better than the one for Lasha. I've heard people mention also that the era ought to be taken into account. And indeed, I made that case too in my book, The Greatest Weightlifters of All Time, where I mentioned that it was necessary to acknowledge that today's lifters do indeed stand on the shoulders of the giants of the past. However, that doesn't really work so well with regards to the weight lifted. For many sports, performance increases somewhat linearly with time, accelerated when a new improved piece of equipment comes out, and then decelerated when anti-doping improves testing. but in general they go up. A good example of performance going up would be in something like chess. 30 years ago, 2800 would have been the best ranking in the world, and then 2900, then 3000, then 3100, and so on. Today's best would beat the best of a few decades ago, because for decades players have been building on the knowledge that was already known, learning more, discovering more, and generally pushing the game forwards. But you can't necessarily call today's players better, despite the fact that they would probably win, because each era is separated by a gap in knowledge. The comparison just isn't fair. But weightlifting is different. Performance isn't increasing. Performance isn't even stagnating. Performance is decreasing for a wealth of reasons. Though the number of sport performance studies have increased over the years, the training modalities in weightlifting since the 80s haven't really changed much. In fact, the bedrock of most modern programming comes from Laputin, Medvedev, and Oleshko. Despite this stagnation, Lasha is the only male weightlifter moving in the opposite direction to the trend of the sport. Women's weightlifting is somewhat different, with their more recent entry into the Olympics occurring much later in the year 2000, and as a result, their growth phase is very much still in full swing. This incredible training session is casual now for Lasha, and having filmed him total 50 kilos more than this in training, it's important for me and for everyone watching to not forget how incredible it is to see someone move these weights so casually yet so precise. So slow in many ways, yet with so much momentum behind it. So what will Lasha do at the Olympic Games this year? Will we see 485, 490? It's always an honour to watch this man lift weights. And don't forget, you can check out his next training session from this competition on the Weightlifting House Patreon.